welcome to the 5-drop card review with Dew. Let's dive on in. Of course, we're going to be doing this in the same manner we do all of the card reviews, doing the soulbound cards first, and the crafted cards second. So, starting with the soulbounds. We start with Booty Bay Bodyguard. He is a 5-mana 5/4 with Taunt. He is crap. Most 4-drops will be able to trade with him, and I mean, heck, even for his stats, you could get an Ancient Brewmaster with the same stats. He just suffers, in terms of stats, way too much for having Taunt. So, no good. Don't use him. There's no excuse. Next up, Darkscale Healer, a 5-mana 4/5 with a battle cry of Restore 2 health to all friendly characters. It's a Yeti with some fascinating text, but that being said, still it's only a Yeti at best, so also not something run very often. There's also better cards that you could run, which combo healing with decent statistics, so for example, Earthring Farseer. That's got healing, it's got decent stats, so yeah. Wouldn't really play this card either, really. Next up, Frostwolf Warlord, a 5-mana 4/4 with a battle cry of gain +1/+1 for each other friendly minion on the battlefield. Not used very often. It has potential in rush and aggro decks, you know, because they'll have plenty of minions on the field, but you can never really rely on having a large field, and if your board gets wiped and you need to play a 5-drop or something like that, you're going to get a 4/4 out of him. So while he's got potential, he requires that you have, you know, a lot of minions on the field, and that's never something you should count on. You know? So he's not played very often. He's usable in rush and aggro decks, which have a lot of minions. Also usable in shaman decks, but yeah. Alright, next up, Gurubashi Berserker, 5-mana 2/7 with a text of whenever this minion takes damage, gain +3 attack. Unfortunately the initial stats make it not usable in any deck but a mage deck, because mages can ping the Gurubashi to buff its attack. So, you know, for a mage this card is basically a 5/6. For every other class you gotta find ways to damage it and keep it alive for that attack stat, so it's reasonably useful for Priest as well, but I still don't recommend it. There's better creatures than this to run in a Priest deck, like Injured Blademaster. So, yeah, Gurubashi Berserker, useful in some mage decks, but otherwise don't bother using him. Next up, Nightblade, a 5-mana 4/4 with a battle cry of deal 3 damage to the enemy hero. This card sucks, period. The stats are terrible for a 5-mana card. Especially since you only gain 3 damage for it, so disgusting. Next up, Stormpike Commando, a 5-mana 4/2 with a battle cry of deal 2 damage. This thing might as well be a higher mana cost, worse version of a Dark Iron Dwarf, so don't run this if you have Dark Iron Dwarf and could run Dark Iron Dwarf instead. It is cheaper, has the same effect, and has better stats, so yeah. Next up, Nothing. There are not very many 5-mana soulbounds, are there? Okay, so let's start on the crafted ones. Abomination, a 5-mana 4/4 with Taunt and a Death Rattle of deal 2 damage to all characters. This means your own, your opponents, you know, both heroes as well. Abomination is okay against aggro and rush decks, simply because the act of killing him creates board wipe, but still, his stats suck for a 5/5, and yeah, it's just, against any other kind of deck that isn't rush or aggro, this card is going to fall flat on its face. Also, if it gets silenced, it's basically useless. You know, you would have paid way too much for this creature. So, on a different note, it is far better than Stormpike Commando. But yeah. On top of that, it could wipe your own board. 2 damage to all characters, which can be set off when your opponent chooses instead of when you choose. is a lot of power to give to your opponents, so yeah, don't... I guess if you're playing against a lot of Russian aggro decks, then go for it, but otherwise, Abomination isn't a card I'd ever put in a draft deck, so yeah. Next up, Azure Drake, a 5-mana 4/4. He has spell damage +1 and a battle cry of draw a card. Yes, I know I've harped a lot on 5-mana cards that only have stats of 4-mana cards. However, because you get card draw off of the Drake and you get spell damage, it's actually a very good card. Yeah, because of drawing a card. That makes the entire difference, because even when this guy gets dealt with, which will be rather easy because of the stats, you've already drawn a card to replace him, so he's gotten himself back in value. On top of that, having spell damage means he's a dangerous card to leave on the field against, you know, priests and mages and shamans and rogues. So, yeah. Actually a pretty good card, and I would recommend running it. Next up, Captain Greenskin, a 5-mana 5/4 legendary card. He's a pirate with a battle cry of give your weapon +1/+1. He sucks. For a legendary card, he follows the tried and true pirate creed, run me in a weapon deck. And weapon decks are not all that popular these days because they are absolutely wrecked by taunt. So, yeah. That's Greenskin. His stats are again that of a 4-mana card, and he's only useful in a weapon deck, so don't get him. I would not ever recommend crafting him. If you get him out of a pack, fine, but don't ever craft him. Next up, Elite Tauren Chieftain. He is a 5-mana 5/5 with a battle cry of give both players the power to rock with a power chord card. The stats in and of themselves are decent enough, so, you know, he's not a terrible 5/5. The cards he gives each player will be one of the following 3. There is I Am Murloc. Actually, I need to pull these up and make them a little larger. Give me 2 seconds here. Yep. I'm sorry, I should have had all this out of the way a lot sooner. Where the devil? Oh. Here we go. Sorry about this. I Am Murloc. Summon 3, 4, or 5 1/1 Murlocs. It's a 4-mana spell, so that can be useful. Again, it is very expensive though, and you could basically get the equivalent of a 3/3 or 4/4 out of it. And they're all 1/1 Murlocs that are going to fill up your board like little tokens, and they could be destroyed by board clear, so the Murloc card isn't all that great. I think it's probably the worst of the 3. But when you stack it with the fact that, you know, it's a free card to come with a 5/5, still not terrible value. Next up is Rogues Do It. Okay, now what is this doing? Come on. Really? Okay, well, it's, it just deals 5 damage and draws you a card. Sorry, I should have had some of this pulled up earlier, but, that's what that card does, and it's 4 mana, so it's actually the best card of the 3 to get. Yeah. Dealing 5 damage and drawing a card that exceeds the 1 damage per mana mark and draws you a card, so that's a really good spell. Especially to come with a 5/5. It is expensive, but I mean, still it's good. And next up is the Warrior card that comes with it. Power of the Horde. You summon a random Horde Warrior. This basically just means some random Orc or Tauren minion from the game. It's not like there's actual Horde warriors to my knowledge. Just... Let's see if I can find one. Okay, wait a minute. Where did... Like, Frostwolf Warlord. So... Yeah. Just stuff like that. He'll start summoning cards with that, so... That card has the potential to be the worst, but typically I find it's a little bit better than the Murloc card. So... That's Tone Chieftain. He's very rarely ever played because he gives these cards to your opponent too. So he could potentially give your opponent, you know, rogues do it, and then, you know, your opponent's automatically got an answer to him for free and gets card draw from it. So yeah, I just wouldn't bother playing the Chieftain. It's my personal opinion. That's also why I don't know very much about him. I've never seen a deck that actually plays the Chieftain. He's just a kind of dead card floating around out there. Anyway. Enough of that. Next up, Faceless Manipulator. He's a 5-mana 3/3. Ignore those stats because his battle cry is choose a minion and become a copy of it. This means that you could copy a far more valuable creature. You guys have probably seen me do it if you've been watching me play at all and not just watching the card reviews. Cards like Ragnaros, things like that, that are far more expensive to play and are very high value, you can just copy from either your side of the field or your opponent's. With Priest, the combo is especially nice because if you copy large creatures, you can usually do that and then use Shadow Word Death. It's like a mind control for 8 mana. So, Faceless Manipulator is pretty good anyway in just about any deck because, again, you can spend only 5 mana to copy creatures that are far more powerful and valuable. So, high value creature. Note, silence does not turn this back into a manipulator. Silence will simply silence the minion it becomes. So, the only way to actually get this played as a 3/3 is if Alarmobot brings it out into the field. Only way. Next up, Fen Creeper, a 5-mana 3/6 with Taunt. He's not bad. I mean, he's a really effective meat wall against lower cost creatures. However, I don't know, he's not going to trade with more expensive cards. You'll notice even a lot of these not so great 5-drops have 4 health, and, you know, the Creeper won't trade with that, so yeah, the Creeper's durable and he's a good meat wall against low cost creatures, but against higher cost creatures he's not as good, so your choice as to whether or not you want to run him. Not terrible, not great. Next up, Gadgetzan Auctioneer, a 5-mana 4/4 with the text, whenever you cast a spell, draw a card. This card is vicious because in rogue decks where you can literally fling like 8 spells in one turn, you instantly can draw replacements for all of them. So this card is good in spell flinging decks. If you don't have a deck that just throws spells left and right, I would not recommend running Gadgetzan Auctioneer because, again, his stats are rather bad for his mana cost. However, the text makes up for it. So, really good card, especially in rogue decks, but if you're going to be using, you know, rush decks or even control decks, I wouldn't bother running this guy. He's just like the foundation of combo, but doesn't work anywhere else. So, yep. Next up, Harrison Jones. He is a 5-mana 5/4 legendary with a battle cry of destroy your opponent's weapon and draw cards equal to its durability. This means that, you know, he's a great counter to weapon decks, so pirates can suck it. And yeah, he's still a 5/4 on top of that, so his stats aren't terrible for a 5-mana card. The best use of this is if you are playing against a Shaman who drops a Doomhammer on turn 5, you're going second, and you drop a Harrison Jones on it. Boom. You'll be liable to draw like 6 cards and get rid of a Doomhammer and play a 5/4 for 5 mana. Value explosion. So yeah, if you end up playing against a lot of decks that just are running weapons left and right, put Harrison Jones in. He is the best card in existence to use against weapon decks. Next up, Silverhand Knight. He is a 5-mana 4/4 with a battle cry of summon a 2/2 Squire. Pow. There's the Squire. This means his effective stats combined are the stats of a 6/6, but again, because it's split up, it's often easier to deal with. That being said, he's still pretty good. Those stats are decent enough, and yeah. I'm not going to say he's a great card. I don't see a lot of decks these days that really find a good way to make use of him. But on the other hand, he's not a bad card either. I mean, you get pretty good stats for summoning him. So, I don't know. Maybe that's why he's never run. He's just all stats, no effect at all. No text. Oh well. Next up, Spiteful Smith. A 5-mana 4/6 with Enrage. Your weapon has +2 attack. Good in weapon decks, but nobody runs weapon decks. However, being a 4/6 is pretty good, especially for a 5-drop, so if you're a warrior or a shaman, running this card isn't a bad idea, so yeah. Pretty good. Pretty good in decks that will run weapons. Also good in rogue decks, so yeah. That's the Smith. Next up, Stampeding Kodo, a 5-mana 3/5 with a battle cry of destroy a random enemy minion with 2 or less attack. Kodo has the potential to get high value against like Gurubashi Berserkers, Oasis Snapjaws, you know, cards like that, but his stats are really bad, you know? A 3/5, that's the same stats as a Tazdingo, and he doesn't have taunt. All he'll do is destroy an enemy minion with 2 attack or less. So he takes out a very small threat, and then basically becomes a Tazdingo. So, unless your opponent runs Gurubashi Berserker or Oasis Snapjaw or cards like that, Kodo's not a good card to be running, so he's got value potential, but, yeah. Oh well. Next up, Stranglethorn Tiger, a 5-mana 5/5 with Stealth. This means that he will basically be a 5-mana card that will deal 5 damage wherever you want. Since he has 5 health and Stealth, this means there is no form of board clear in the game which will outright deal with him. Flame Strike won't do it, Alkali Circle won't do it. No deck has one, like, board clear card that can deal 5 damage. You would need to use a lot of different AoE cards just to get rid of him. So he's going to deal 5 damage to something. He's also got good stats. I mean, he's liable to survive the encounter as well. So, all in all, Stranglethorn Tiger is a pretty good card. But again, the text leaves something to be desired, so yeah. He's not run often because he doesn't have any useful effect. He's just a good, well-rounded creature with good stats. So, yeah, that's the Tiger. And last but not least, Ventricle Mercenary. He's a 5-mana 7/6 with the text of your minions cost 3 more. That's an insane threat for turn 5. So he can be a threat, but that being said, once you put this on the board, you're basically relinquishing your ability to play any creatures whatsoever until he dies. So, not used all that often, unless you happen to be playing a deck that, you know, doesn't run very many creatures. Up to you if you want to use Ventrico. He's got potential, but yeah. I don't know, sometimes the price to pay for playing a Ventrico is just way too much, and it will lose you the game. Sometimes it will win you the game because it gives you so much board pressure. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that's it. So yeah, that's it for the 5-drop card review. Thank you all for watching, hope you enjoyed. If you did not, well, send me some hate mail, I'll ignore it. It happens.